Roll call, legislative day number 16, Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. Anderson? Here. Barlow? Present. Boner? Here. Brennan? Here. Case? Present. Cooper? Here. Craigo? Here. Crum? Here. Dockstader? Here. Driscoll? Here. French? Here. Guru? Here. Hicks? Here. Hutchings? Here. Ide? Here. Jones? Here. Kolb? Present. Landon? Here. Larson? Here. McEwen? Here. Nethercott? Here. Olson? Here. Pappas? Here. Pearson? Here. Rothfuss? Here. Salazar? Here. Schuler? Here. Scott? Here. Smith? Here. Steinmetz? Here. President Beitman?
Here.
Mr. President, 31 present.
Thank you, Ellen. Prayer by Pastor Blake Denlinger. Sorry, sir.
Let us pray. Almighty God, who governs and gives law to all creation, righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. You are a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. And those who know your name put their trust in you, for you, O Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you. We seek you now in humble prayer to ask you to guide the lawmakers assembled here today. Bless them as they undertake their work, as they are called to lead and to legislate, to make difficult decisions about complex matters, and to bear the responsibility for those decisions, whether the passage of time proves them right or wrong, and when many will criticize after the fact, in hindsight knowing what cannot be known now. But would you guide them now in advance? Give them clarity of thought and wisdom of decision. Bring to them the information that they need to make the right decisions, and clear away any misunderstanding or deception that might lead them to error. Grant them efficiency to do the work of this day quickly, and also patience to consider it carefully. Give them courage to stand for what is right, and humility to understand the limitations of their own wisdom and power. O God of righteousness and justice, bless and help these senators assembled here today, that our state may be blessed by increasingly just and righteous laws because of their labor. All this I pray in the name of Jesus Christ, the King who came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Amen.
Amen. Senator Smith, will you lead us in the pledge? Senator Smith? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Reading correction, approval of journal.
Mr. President, your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 3, 2025 has been read and recommends it be approved. Senator Crum, Chairman.
Are there any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. No doctor of the day. Today in history, 1789, George Washington was chosen to serve as the first U.S. president by a unanimous vote in the first electoral college. Inauguration day followed on April 30th, 1789. Quote of the day, be the reason someone believes in the goodness of people. Karen Salmonson. Dad joke of the day, what did the right eye say to the left eye? Between us, something smells. And we have our first submission from a YouTube viewer out there. If at first you don't shenan again. So there it is. Announcement, Senate files are due out of the Senate standing committees by Friday, February 7th. Friday, February 7th. Those are your announcements. Senator Salazar, Vice President Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Absent objection, I'd like to re-refer Senate File 155, International Physician License, and Senate File 172, Physical Therapy Licensure Compact, back to general file. Thank you, Mr. President.
Absent objection, it is so ordered. Bills on second reading. Senate File 101, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 101, post-conviction DNA testing procedure amendments.
Senate File 101 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 111, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 111, net metering revisions.
Senate File 111 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 114, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 114, missing persons reporting requirement.
Senate File 114 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 127, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 127, administrative rules, legislative review and objection.
Senate File 127 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 139, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 139, trapping requirements, licenses, seasons, and setbacks.
Senator Dockstader.
Mr. Chairman, I promised to do a follow-up. We had a question on a repealer yesterday. I checked with the agency commission working with this, and they said they're not concerned with repealing it because it strikes archaic language. Ask for your continued favorable support. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Senate File 139 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 143, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 143, public monies, deposits in credit unions.
There is an amendment. Will the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 143, second reading amendment number 1, page 4, lines 19 after.
Thank you. Senator Crum.
Mr. President, I'd move approval of amendment, second reading amendment number 1. What this amendment does, we've heard about access for municipalities. A town in the center part of the state's been really used as an example of that. What this bill, or this amendment does, would allow access to credit unions for towns that do not have access to other financial institutions within a 10-mile radius. So the town in central Wyoming that we've talked about could use a credit union within that 10-mile radius and get their banking services met. However, if there is a bank in those towns, then credit unions couldn't use it. The whole bill for the past several years has been about access to banking services. We hear about having to drive 24 miles to make deposits. That's a hardship. This way, this amendment allows that hardship to go away, that they could have access to a depository that they claim make that deposit. So it's very simple. If they don't have access to a financial institution, a bank within 10 miles, they could use a credit union. And I would urge your approval on the amendment.
Thank you. Discussion on the amendment. Senator Nethercott. Oops.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against this amendment. Where it is nice to see some movement from the banks, it's ironic that they would want to put this type of regulation that creates such unfairness into our free market system and into a state with such conservative Republican values of less government. So I find this deeply ironic, but I do appreciate the effort and the acknowledgement of the historical challenges associated with access to financial institutions by so many Wyoming constituents across the state. But I think it really misses the mark, and misses the mark of fairness and access to the people of Wyoming. So just as a reminder, it is my strong position, and the position of many AGs prior to, that the bill is constitutional. And I have concerns that this amendment would make the bill unconstitutional due to equal access and equal opportunity, where you are creating two different classes of financial institutions to the disadvantage of Wyoming constituents and taxpayers. So on and against the amendment, vote no.
Anybody else wish to speak on the amendment before the sponsor? Okay, back to you, Senator Crum.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I urge you to vote yes. This does give access. When we hear about constitutionality, we hear one opinion on one side on constitutionality. Certainly, there's the other side that we talked about yesterday on constitutionality. I guess it's for a court, if it ever gets there, to decide on what is constitutionality. But there are certainly more than one opinion, and one opinion doesn't make things constitutional. With that, this does give access. This whole thing's been about access for those in remote areas, and I would strongly urge you to vote yes, because it does give access to those who would need access. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We're voting on Senator Crum's motion to adopt second. Oh, Senator
Yeas
Scott.
and nays, please.
Yeas and nays have been called. Chief Clerk, call the roll.
Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 143, roll call. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? No. Boner? Aye. Brennan? No. Case? Aye. Cooper? No. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstader? Aye. Driscoll? No. French? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Aye. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? No. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? No. Olson? No. Pappas? No. Pearson? No. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Smith? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Beitman?
No.
No. Closing vote. Pearson? No to aye. Closing. Vote closed. On the amendment, 12 aye, 19 no.
Second reading amendment number 1 has failed. We're back on the bill. Anybody wish to speak on the bill? Senator Crum.
Mr. President, we've heard a lot of discussion yesterday, so I thought I'd just try to clear up some things. One of the discussions were there were no credit unions in existence when this Constitution was put in place in naming banks. That is a true statement. However, there were in 1819, there were savings and loans in place, which in many ways operated as credit unions today. They were owned by the community, by people within the community. Those savings and loans were in place as of 1819. Credit unions came in 1909. And it was clear in the Constitution of the state of Wyoming that they named banks. They didn't say banks and savings and loans or banks and other things. So I just wanted to clear that up, that there were savings and loans, a similar organization that was excluded from our Constitution. Then I wanted to talk a little bit about, right from the National Credit Union Association, the NCUA, it says, members' deposits in a credit union, otherwise known as shares, allow the members to become owners of the credit union with the right to run for election to become credit union officials, as well as to vote for credit union officials and certain credit union matters. We talked a lot yesterday about Section 14 of the Wyoming Constitution, or Article 14, Section 7 of the Wyoming Constitution. I think we beat that to death. But I'd like you to turn to Article 16, Section 6 of the Wyoming Constitution that reads, neither the state nor a county, city, township, town, school district, or any other political subdivision shall subscribe to or become the owner of capital stock in any association or corporation, unless it's a public entity, goes on. So this is clearly, according to the NCUA, you get shares and ownership in an association, which is strictly forbidden in the Wyoming Constitution. I get back, if we want to do this as a body, we need to propose a constitutional amendment. This is not the way for us as a body to try to interpret and bend the Constitution of the state of Wyoming, which we all pledge to uphold. So again, I strongly would say vote no on this, because it is unconstitutional as you read the Constitution. If you want to try to bend it, then I guess you bend it. But what this says in black and white is it's unconstitutional to own shares in an association or a corporation, which is what this does. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Great question from the, by the opponent. The question was answered in committee. The credit unions provided clear explanation that this would be considered a non-member deposit. Non-member deposit. And so that exists, and that's how these deposits would be treated, so I don't think that there's any additional concern. Or I'd be happy to bring a full legal opinion by a number of legal firms in the state, an attorney general's opinion, and I will provide all of those legal reviews so we don't continue to have constitutional debates each day on the floor, although I think they're certainly worthy of being addressed. Again, I'm not, I hope you have faith in me that I would not be bringing forth a bill that is unconstitutional. This bill and this topic has been vetted by numerous attorney generals over the course of decades, as well as LSO staff. The bill is constitutional. These would be considered non-member deposits. I'm happy to bring forth additional information for third reading. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else? For your second time, Senator Crum.
Yeah, and just to close this out and not to delay us, because I know we're delaying other people's bills. But again, there's nowhere in the Credit Union Association says you have non-member deposits. That's a new thing. Maybe if we're starting to get new information here, things that aren't standard, again, I encourage you to vote no. And maybe this is a topic we take up in the interim and really get the true facts of the matter and look at it in a bigger detail rather than pass something now that, in my opinion, is unconstitutional when you read the Constitution. So again, urge you to vote no and the possibility of sending this to the interim. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. May I switch to speak on Senate File 143? Senate File 143 having been read two separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, is so ordered. Senate File 148, second reading of the Senate file.
Senate File 148, Fire Suppression and Restoration Funding.
There is an amendment. Would the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 148, second reading amendment number 1, page 10, after line 2, insert.
Senator Crago.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 148, ask for the body's favorable consideration. So yesterday, there was a request from the back of the room regarding essentially order of operation, which bills will control. And so what this amendment does is make Senate File 148 subordinate to both our budget bill and to Senate File 152. And so it will be at the bottom of the list, both in terms of funding and in terms of policy. And so that's all it does. Again, like I said yesterday, this is a backup bill. And so living up to what I said I was doing and what I plan to do. This bill just follows through, or this amendment just follows through on that, Mr. President. Happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions? Question being called. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. The amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Discussion on the bill? Hearing none. Senate File 148 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 149, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 149, Wildlife Conservation License Plates Amendments.
Senate File 149 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 152, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 152, Wildfire Management Task Force and State Forester.
There is an amendment. Would the reading clerk read in the amendment?
Senate File 152, second reading amendment number 1, page 11, after line 11, insert.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 152. Good colleagues, similar to what we just did with Senate File 148, this makes this bill, the appropriations in this bill, subordinate to the budget bill. So we have one that's subordinate to this one, and this one is subordinate to the budget bill. Be glad to stand for any questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for the bringer of the amendment? Hearing none, assuming you're ready for the question, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. That amendment has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Any discussion on the bill? Senate File 152 having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 156, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 165, Cancellation of Registration Notice Amendments.
Correction, 165. Senate File 165, having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 167, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 167, Board of Chiropractic Examiners Criminal History Records.
Senate File 167, having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 186, second reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 186, Advanced Nuclear Reactor Manufacturers Fuel Storage.
Senate File 186, having been read 2 separate times. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. Bill's on third reading. We have one bill. Senate File 69, third reading of the Senate File.
Senate File 69, Homeowner Property Tax Exemption, sponsored by the Revenue Committee, an act relating to taxation.
There is an amendment. Would the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 69, third reading amendment number 1, delete.
Senator Jones.
I move Senate File 69, third reading amendment, and request your favorable consideration.
Senator Jones, can you move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 69?
Can I move may I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 69?
Thank you.
Basically, this amendment does leave the property tax relief at 25%. All it does is address the backfill to our communities, and it gives them a 12.5% backfill. I hope you will look at this. It's a small amount, but to some of our communities, this is a devastating effect that we're taking down here. We know that numerous communities that we all represent did not have higher property tax payments go into their coffers, yet we are still taking more and more out of them. This effect into my community, I can give you some examples. One of our mayors did have a post yesterday, and some of the things that we're looking at losing in the southwest part of the state is lost jobs, where we might be losing our civic center, losing our rec center, closing a softball complex, which is used by adults and children. Our senior center is at stake here. And just for everybody else, if that doesn't apply to you, the snow removal from your streets is a pretty large concern. I know that some communities here do need tax relief. This bill is not messing with the 25%. It's just backfilling to some of these communities. This is a responsible approach, and I do think we need to take this into consideration. What you do today doesn't just affect your community, it affects all the communities across the state of Wyoming. I would ask that you vote yes on my amendment.
Thank you, Senator Jones. Anybody wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Boy, this horse we chose to ride is losing its shoes, it's losing its legs. There's not much left of it. I don't know if we can get to the cantina with the horse we're on right now. You know, we started off with 4 good amendments. It looked like this thing was going to be a good bill, a good tax relief bill for the citizens, and it's doing nothing but going backwards. So on and against this amendment, Mr. President.
Anybody else wish to speak on the amendment? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. President. On and against the amendment, you know, these cuts are going to be brutal to our communities. The proponent of this amendment is absolutely right that cuts to property taxes that are of the magnitude that we're talking about, whether it's 25 or 50%, will hurt the people of our districts, of the state of Wyoming. But that's what was asked for. The idea that we would use savings to mitigate the implications of the tax cuts, to make it seem, Mr. President, like no tax cuts occurred, is honestly unfair, I think, to the future of the state and to the folks that really put a lot of good work into establishing a structure of savings where we can sustain the hard times. The LISRA was not designed to pay for tax cuts. It was to pay for the economic instability of the state due to the fluctuations in the economy. We know that we are in a good time right now as a state. Our revenues are strong, and yet our strong revenues right now can't sustain some of the things that we're talking about. The idea that we would now start burning through our savings to pay for the tax cuts in the good times, really is detrimental to that long-term planning of how the state manages the hard times. And we know they're right around the corner. They always are. So, Mr. President, I don't think the people of the state of Wyoming can afford the idea of a backfill, which we know is always temporary, right? We know it's unsustainable in the long run. It's just a few years where we pretend we don't have problems before we go off the cliff. We have to be realistic about the implications of property tax cuts. Backfills try to make an imagination where we don't have to accept the downside, but we can have the upside. And we can do that for maybe a couple of years by burning through our capital. I think we need to hold against backfills. We need to look at this consideration, look at this policy decision with our eyes wide open, and the people of the state need to be looking at it with their eyes wide open and understand the implications of a tax cut, rather than us trying to create some machinations to pretend that they don't have implications, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else on the amendment? Senator Boner. Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to make sure we get down to, it looks like what the amendment does. It's not a complete backfill near as I can just try to read it in, maybe some clarification there. It seems like this is a middle-of-the-road approach where, where you backfill some but not all. If I could give a better explanation of that from the sponsor, I think that'd be helpful. But, I think that if that's the case, then I think I could support this backfill. If we're sort of splitting the burden here, it looks like instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars in the backfill, we might be looking more like a 30 to 40. And I think that might be a good middle-of-the-road approach. So just a little bit more explanation as to exactly what the backfill is, how much are we helping out with, and how much are we not. I think that'd be helpful for my understanding of the amendment. Thank you, Senator. Anybody else wish to speak on the amendment before the sponsor? Let's go to Senator McEwen.
I just want to reemphasize, I handed out a piece of paper by county on how much their budget is made up from property taxes. And one of the last speakers, I'm really impressed at what they can do with 2% of their budget. Senior centers, ballparks. At the end of the day, we need to understand how property tax is given out. And trust me, I'm taking heat from home. I got an email from one of those politicians that runs the localist of governments. In other words, not a county, who said, what are we gonna do if we cut property taxes? It's not even gonna affect cities, towns, and municipalities. And as we go on this, if we do this, we take the county and we take it down to 1%. There's other counties that are gonna get hit a little harder. But I'm telling you, the sky isn't falling. And I support what the senator from the Ivy Tower said. This is what people asked us to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else? Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're in a situation where not all counties are created equal here. 3 of my 5 counties are amongst those hardship counties. And it does devastate them, what's fixing to happen. Our fire districts are everything. We don't have the luxury of, in a lot of these communities, of a big rec center or ballparks. We're basically playing on the dirt and swimming in the creek. And to take more funds away from these small municipalities and small counties, it does devastate us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, Senator Jones, back to you.
Okay, I can try to answer that. What this bill does is it says that the state treasurer will reimburse each county treasurer for the amount of taxes that would have been collected if the property was not exempt, equal to 12.5%. So it's 12.5% of the lost revenue from our 25% reduction. I have listened to the testimony around here. I do think that we do need to recognize that we're not all having a good time right now. We're not in good times. Not every community is having a good time. In my part of the state, we have experienced boom and bust cycles, but right now we're down. Oil, gas, coal, that's where we get our revenue from, and we're just not getting it. So the past several years, my community already has been taking cuts. They've been cutting every single year. So to ask them to cut again, and let's realize that not all of these communities paid an extra 50% in their property taxes. My community paid 19.5%. I think there was testimony the other day that inflation since 2019 is at 25%. Our community was responsible. We took the cuts, we did all we could do. Our citizens weren't overtaxed. They do deserve a tax benefit now, but to what extent do we expect everybody to absorb all the decisions we've made down here? We're not even holding some of these communities accountable for what they charge their citizens. They could have taken a lower mill levy, and they chose not to. So here we are down here trying to fix everything with one approach. This is not a cookie cutter problem. Every community comes with a different problem and issue and different finances. Please take that into consideration.
Okay, this amendment contains an appropriation. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 69, roll call. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? No. Boner? Aye. Brennan? Aye. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? No. Dockstetter? No. Driscoll? No. French? No. Guru? No. Hicks? Hicks, no. Aye. Hutchings? No. Ide? No. Jones? Aye. Cole? Aye. Landon? No. Larson? No. McEwen? No. Nethercott? No. Olson? No. Pappas? No. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? No. Schuler? No. Scott? Aye. Smith? No. Steinmetz? Aye. President Beitman?
No.
No. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. On the amendment, 11 aye, 20 no.
Third reading amendment number 1 has failed. Third reading amendment number 2. Will the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 69, third reading amendment number 2, delete.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 69 and ask for your favorable consideration. Good senators, we've plowed this ground before. This restores Senate File 69 back to its original intent, which is a 50% reduction, no backfill, 2-year sunset. This is the right policy for Wyoming. This is the right policy for the Senate. I ask for your favorable consideration.
Discussion on the amendment. Senator Scott.
Mr. President, yeas and nays, please.
Yeas and nays have been called. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. President. This gets us back to the horse we started on and all of the equipment, the saddle and the rope and the whole shooting match, effectively where everybody was shooting for from the get-go. And I'm on and for this amendment. This is where we need to go. This is good tax policy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ide. Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. I support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else on the amendment? Question being called. All those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion? Oh, that's right. Ayes and noes. How soon I forget. Roll call. Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
The third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 69, roll call. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? No. Brennan? No. Case? No. Cooper? No. Crago? No. Crum? No. Dockstetter? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? No. Hutchings? No. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Cole? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? No. Rothfuss? Aye. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Aye. Scott? Aye. Smith? Aye. Steinmetz? No. President Biteman?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Closing. Vote closed. Second reading amendment number 2, 19 aye, 12 no.
Third reading amendment number 2 has been adopted. To Senate File 69. Back on the, we have another amendment. Third reading amendment number 3. Will the reading clerk please read in the amendment?
Senate File 69, third reading amendment number 3, page 4, after line 12, insert.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move third reading of amendment number 3 to Senate File 69, ask for the body's consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, as I go home and I visit with folks and hear from folks, particularly in the industry that I'm in, which is agriculture, I hear folks say, you know what, I need the services in my community. I want to have a way to pay, if there's going to be a reduction, an exemption, I want to be able to put money toward this. So this basically says if you get the tax bill and say it's a 50% exemption or 25, whatever the bill ends up with, that myself, as a property owner paying my bill, I can pay the full amount that would have been due without the exemption. I think this is a passive way, if you will. All the other exemptions we have, whether it's veterans or long-term owners or whatever, they're an active exemption. You have to actually apply for them. This is one where you can just make the choice to pay it. So I throw this out there because I think it's important. And one of the reasons I think it's important because agricultural lands pay based on productive value. So our taxes actually go up at over a 5-year rolling average, much differently than residential, et cetera. So there's a little uniqueness to the world that I guess I live in with this, but I'd ask for your favorable consideration and be glad to stand for any questions, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Any discussion on the amendment? Discussion on the amendment. Hearing none, question being called. All those in favor of Senator Barlow's motion to adopt third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 69, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. That amendment has been adopted. Back on the bill. Discussion on the bill. Senator Hill.
Mr. President, are we on the bill? So, members of the body, I'm going to be a no on the bill, and I'm going to explain to you why. When we deal with the nature of this, there's 2 components of money that we're talking about. 70% of those property taxes are for the school districts and the school foundation program. 30% belong to those local governments. So just think about that. You know, ever since I've been down here, we've always talked about local control, local control. But what we've done with this, and we had the option, Mr. President, is we could have gone in with the section and the provision and the property taxes that we're responsible. This legislative body is responsible for funding the school foundation program. And we could have gone in and stayed in our lane and said, we're going to reduce those mills assessment, because that's what we have jurisdiction over. We could have said, there's 43 mills that are collected, 12 goes to the local school districts. All the rest of that comes back to the state of Wyoming. Now, we could have very well, because this is our jurisdiction and our responsibility, gone there and said, we're going to reduce those mills on those property taxes appropriately, and that would have been appropriate, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. But what we did is we couldn't stay on our own lane. We said, we're going to usurp all those local governments. We're going to have a paternalistic view on, we're going to go down there and we're going to provide property taxes. Damn with the local governments. We don't care what they say. And what we've done is we prescribed a one-size-fits-all that doesn't work for all of Wyoming. It's not fair for all of Wyoming. Because we've now gone in and said, no, we don't believe in local control. We're going to usurp your authority. We're not going to stay in our lane, and we're going to reduce those funds for those local government entities. We could have dealt with the 43 mills. That's our jurisdiction. We chose not to. And so, Mr. President, the other discussion that is a little bit bothering for me is we keep talking about riding this horse. Mr. President, we had a whole corral full of horses out there. A whole corral full of horses, and we said, I don't know, wasn't my decision to say, we're gonna let this horse out of the corral and we're gonna ride it. You know, and I'll tell you, Mr. President, in my opinion, because we didn't stay on our lane, we usurped the jurisdiction of local governments, we're now gonna throw a saddle on a sore-backed horse. You know, Mr. President, in my part of the state, I don't know very many cowboys who do that. And so just go ahead, saddle this horse up, usurp local control, don't stay in your lane, throw that saddle on this horse. Mr. Chairman, I understand completely what some of these communities are going through. When you have double-digit, 20, 30% a year, I've looked at the numbers. We could have done that with the mill levies if we'd have just stayed in our lane and dealt with the schools. And then the responsibility lies with those local governments to address that issue. And we chose not to do that. And we didn't let all the horses run. I was told this is the horse that I got to ride. Mr. President, I'm not throwing my saddle on this horse because I don't think we stayed in our lane. And it's not our jurisdiction to go back and tell those local taxing elected officials. County commissioners are elected. Supervisors for many of these special districts are elected. It's their responsibility to their constituents that elected them this office to make a determination whether they reduce those mills. It's not our job to usurp their elected responsibility. We should have dealt with the school program. That's our jurisdiction, and we should have stayed in our lane. And so, Mr. Chairman, I understand the demand from some of you in your counties, but I'm telling you, this ain't the horse that we ought to be saddling. On it against the bill.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go to Senator Scott next.
Mr. President, I'm going to vote aye on this bill, and let me explain why. Mr. President, our revenue system in Wyoming is unusual among the several states because the nature of our revenue is concentrated in ways that come to the state, Mr. President, in terms of the various mineral taxes, both property taxes and severance taxes, and the various non-tax sources, like income from the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, like income from the royalties that we get. All those come to the state. So we've got a centralized revenue system, and it's reflected in our sales tax, where the majority of it does come to the state to finance the schools. Mr. President, I'm convinced that if we restrain our spending properly, as I think we will, as we reduce some of the runaway aspects in our school funding, which I think we will, particularly in the capital construction area. Mr. President, I think we can well afford this tax cut. And, Mr. President, in the last campaign, I spent several days as I went door to door asking my constituents about this tax issue. And everybody was in favor of it. But the reaction I got told me that a significant percentage of the people I represent really need this tax cut badly because they have been hurt by the inflation that's been in the economy the past 4 years generally, and been hurt by the inflation that has specifically been in the value of homes, property and homes. And that has really hurt them. So, Mr. President, for those reasons, I'm going to have to vote aye on this bill, and I think it's the right, responsible thing for the Senate to do.
Discussion on the bill, Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we now have before us historic property tax relief. And to my constituents back home, for years I've tried to provide real property tax for you. For years. Here it is. Here it is. I will vote yes. And today, to my constituents, I have kept my promise to you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Kolb.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I think we've heard kind of both sides of this issue when it comes to a one-size-fits-all approach. It kind of smacks of what the Eastern Bloc does amongst their folks and say, well, you're getting along this train. If you don't like it, tough luck. Well, I don't like it. Tell you why I don't like it is because we have a different situation. This one-size-fits-all bill is throwing us all into one pot of folks that have too much money, have spent it irresponsibly, or maybe saved it, or haven't cut the taxes. I can assure you, in the area, my town, Rock Springs, they have made changes, and certainly the county has too. Sorry, I used a proper name there, Mr. President, but this is important. I recently have gone door to door. I recently have spoken to people, and they're okay with what they pay because it hasn't gone up much. Hasn't gone up, hasn't even kept up with inflation if people really want to know the truth about what my reality is. This is going to hurt because they have not collected more than they needed. They have in fact cut government back. They've cut services. And although not devastating to our county, it is not good, and not good to the city either. The issue, more importantly, is special districts. We have fire districts out there that will be devastated. So I'm not going to celebrate this as any great win because my constituents are different. It's been spoken of in here that we represent those folks. So for me, it's a push-pull situation with the state of Wyoming issue and the people that I represent issue. Well, I'm going to side with the people that I represent. So on and against the bill for the reasons I've stated. It doesn't work for us. It's too simple of an approach, and I do appreciate people's opinions, but in this case, my constituents are damaged, and that's who I represent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go to Senator Ide, then Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want everybody to remember, not to beat the horse analogy to death here, but it is an old horse. There's only 2 years. It's got a sunset. The sky's not falling. There's been a lot of windfalls to a lot of these communities. I understand that there's some that haven't been that fortunate, but this has got a sunset on it. So the horse is going out to pasture in 2 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Senator Jones.
If there's something we can all agree on here today, I think 100% of the people in this room want to give their constituents some tax relief. But why are we the ones down here deciding what every community can afford to lose? And I think I'll continue with the horse analogy. We might as well. Right now, we're riding our neighbor's horse. So take that for what it's worth. But I have to say, on and against this bill, I want tax relief for my community, but not to the detriment of all of our public services.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. First of all, I just want to commend everyone in this chamber. I've been so impressed as this bill has made its way through the process. Really appreciate the words of my friends from the southwest corner and from the southernmost region. These are the bills and the votes for those of us who've been around down here for a while. If you haven't been here for a while, you will come to know that there are votes that you take with you, and nights ahead that you'll revisit this vote. It just happens. A lot of times in the middle of the night, I bet you've had it, Mr. President, you look back on something, you think, boy, I hope I voted the right way on that one. These are tough ones. I came down here, fellow senators, thinking, you know, we just cannot do this to our local communities. You know, I was a backfill guy. I thought, you know what, we got to stand up. Well, you know what? Every time I look at this picture beside me, these 3 grandkids, I think, you know what? We can't deplete everything we've got down here. That's what we set aside for those next generations. So I'm going to stay on this bill today, and I'm going to provide some tax relief to constituents who have asked me to do that. It's going to hurt our local communities. No doubt about it. But you know what? If people don't understand that we're cutting services today, then we have to help them understand that. You can't have your cake and eat it too. This is a tough vote, folks. And I'm gonna wonder, you know, the next several days whether I voted the right way, but I'm gonna stay on this and vote for this tax break for my community back home, and come back down here in 10 months and go to work and see if we can't make sure that we haven't rocked the boat too far. I'm gonna warn of this. I hope if we do this, that we will be very, very careful about all those other things that are flying around this session. We're getting a lot of things in this basket. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. If we put this in place, that's a nice tax break for our folks back home. Let's not put a hole in the boat by putting too many things in this basket. So thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Garreau.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, here we are. Rhetoric, political rhetoric, runs smack dab into policy. Head-on collision right here on the floor. Just a few moments. My constituents have been crying for tax relief, as I've mentioned before, for a long time. They've been hit hardest of all. Rising property values that they've gotten, but taxes have gone up over 100% more in the last few years. We've tried and we have gotten pieces, but now this is the last piece. We've helped the elderly, we've helped cap raises, and we've kind of gone around it with different ways with folks that are older. But now this is everybody, this is working folks, this is the people on the street. But then we've got this service problem and we have this backfill problem, and it's real. It is real. I too understand the realities of this. But you know, I tried the other day to try to cut a middle road, to go the 25% route. I voted for it. And then we took the weekend off, and let me tell you, I heard from my folks at home and people from around the state in no uncertain terms. They said, my politician in my town told me they were going to cut taxes, and you come down there and cut that tax cut in half. I want you to do the right thing and do it now. The rhetoric that flies around was listened to. And now folks are demanding maximum cuts now. I said on the first day, be careful of the words we speak. Well, reality, rhetoric. Let's have a roll call. On and for, Mr. President. Thank you.
To Senator Driscoll next.
Joining the herd, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Folks, it's really interesting where we've got ourselves, Stu, but what we really haven't talked about is what happens if we backfill and what it does. And it's effectively a form of socialism. You're going to take money out of our mineral industry, what's paid it forever, and transfer it across. And I'd like to point out to you, state of Wyoming right now ranks 48th in tax burden. We pay less tax than any state around us, virtually any state in the nation. And we're hitting the reality as our mineral industry declines. We don't have enough money to do it. And someone else has paid those taxes for us for all our life. They've paid it for me, they've paid it for you, all the way across. We get more services than we have actually paid for. So we're faced with a conundrum is, who do we get to pay the taxes, or are we gonna reduce the services? And this is really what the whole question of this is we're forcing a reduction in services. That's when you do a 50% forced reduction in services. And then we have to decide if we want to pay for those services a different way or eliminate them. And that's really what this is all about. This is about money not going around. You know, we have to pay for our education, we have to pay for healthcare, we got base stuff. And the real honest end of it is there's not enough money to go around, and that's really what we're faced with now. So we're making a hard decision to say we're gonna cut part of the subsidy that's gone out there. And it's up to all us together as that impact hits to decide, do you want more or less services, and how do you want them paid for? And that's really, for me, I'm gonna be a yes vote, because I think it's irresponsible to put the state on an unsustainable path by backfilling, forcing future legislatures and future voters to do an unsustainable burden. And that's really what you're doing. I'm not running again, so I walk out of here and I'm fine. But for future legislators, if we've emptied every pot out and emptied all the money, now you've put us in an unsustainable path that's probably a path towards, that dreaded personal income tax or raise tax on industry. How much burden can that horse take? Talking about sore backs is, how much more can it take? So I encourage us all to think about it. Sometimes you have to make really hard decisions that are painful. This is one. And it's one we're gonna be back. You bulge it, it's gonna come back to us. But it's gonna make everybody very aware of where the shortages are at, and what they have been getting and how we pay for them. I encourage you to vote yes. Let's face the reality and let's get down the road. It's got a 2-year sunset. We'll fix it, believe me. We've done this before.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go to Senator Anderson next.
Mr. President, I just wanted to offer a different view on this. In walking my district, there's a little bit different in the center of Casper there. They're homeowners and have been for a long time, have noticed their tax bills going up. Their comment is that the taxes have gone up, and they've not gone up as much as Teton County, but they've gone up some, and they're still pleased that they're the lowest taxed in the country, even though they went up. And so they weren't asking for relief, but they were pointing out to me how much it had gone up. So I'm not either here or against this bill, but I know there are counties that need this, and there's a lot of counties that don't need this, don't need to be cutting their funds, but it's one size fits all. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Along the conversation here, we're getting a little bit of a trend that maybe we don't care about our communities. I would say we do. I could look around, each one of you have made countless trips, haven't you, across the state to sit in front of a certain board and ask for help for your communities? I know I have. I've lost track of the times I've crisscrossed this state, looking after 4 municipalities, many times for my neighboring communities that I don't even represent. They need health care, they need jobs. I trip across this state to try to help them. So this perception that maybe we don't care about our communities, I say we do. It just comes in a different form. If we see this property tax increase continue, and it looks like it will continue in some ways, there'll be little pockets where it's not as bad. But there are areas where people are just out there doing their work, going to school, going to their jobs, going to their churches, and then all of a sudden they open up their tax notice and they have to reconfigure their family budget. So this is where I stand, on and for it. This is this is the one thing that I've heard is I have an occupation that puts me in people's lives every week, every day. And they're not saying to me, we're worried about diversity, we're worried about the border. We're worried about our property taxes. We're worried about our family budgets. On and for the bill.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go to Senator McEwen next.
One thing I haven't heard as we talk about this, all of the funds that come out of this tax cut will be returned to your communities. It will help your economy. It will increase the velocity of money. So there are some good things also, and I just want to remind everybody that they'll have more money to spend, and it will just help the economy. Also, we've had 3 presidents that grew a national budget by cutting taxes. Reagan, John F. Kennedy. What's that?
Try to refrain from using proper names, sir.
Oh, we've had 3 past presidents that actually grew the national budget through tax cuts. It is possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kolb for your second time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to repaint this mural we've been hearing about. To my fellow colleagues, I want to explain my position. I think it's a little too simple to say, oh, it's all about not backfill or backfill. I'm good with 25%, and I understand it's going to hurt. It won't be the end of the world for most situations. However, for special districts, it is. It's pretty bad. But it's not so simple to say, oh, you're for this or you're for all that. It's more nuanced than that. Situation is, yes, the state of Wyoming, we have to ensure the future. We have to, as stewards of that future. Our retirement account for the state is one of them, the PMTF. There's a lot of vehicles we have. We can't deplete that. That's true. But this one-size-fits-all approach, and then playing a 3-card Monte, that somehow you're either all for this or you're all for that, isn't honest. The honest truth is, it's more complicated than that. The honest truth is, we have to balance the future of the state with current impacts. The honest truth is, this is a simple approach that hurts people that other folks probably don't have intentions to hurt, but it does. So I'm not going to be painted into a corner. To be clear, I support a 25% property tax reduction without backfill. That's the clear position I have. And to say anything else or to paint people into a corner saying it's either backfill or it's no backfill, that's not honest. The honest truth is that's where I sit on this. I think 50% is a bridge too far. I think 50% is devastating to my community because of the facts that we don't take under consideration. It's too simple. One size fits all, too simple. And it hurts wrong people. And on top of this, we'll talk about counties. The counties have a control over the mill levy. They can change that. So they haven't. So of course, we're for local government up until we're not for local government. I think that this answer is in the hands of the boards of county commissioners. They're the ones overtaxing, for their particular counties. They're the ones who could decrease the mill levy. I don't know, why on earth do we think that we can just clobber everybody over the head with one size fits all approach? That's my concern about the way we're going about it. Not that we don't need property tax relief. The methodology just doesn't fit. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Smith, for your first time.
Mr. President, I knocked on 2,000 doors personally this summer in my campaign, and the number one issue that I heard was property tax relief. This is a good bill, and we've heard the people, and we're going to help them. And reducing property taxes, just for the record, it is not socialism. It's the opposite. In our minerals industry, they're a vendor of ours. They work for us. And so for them to pay a portion of our, what happens in government, that's just good business on our part. So with that, I'm going to be on and for this, and we're going to give the people what they've asked for. And some of our local governments might have to do with a little less. And if it's over, it is a sunset. So if there's a problem, we can fix it in no time at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else? Senator Rothfuss, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on and against the bill. Mr. President, I appreciate the discussion that we've had, and I think it's been an excellent debate. I really am appreciative of the discussion about the fact that this is a one-size-fits-all solution to a problem that varies by community, and varies by community based on the interests of those communities as well. We know that different communities have different assessed valuations, different capacities, but they also have different values and different interests. And my community really cares tremendously about maintaining full funding for public education. We know that if we're cutting property tax this dramatically, it is going to affect public education. 70% of the revenue is for public education. This 50% cut is going to make a difference. Now, as it stands right now, we'll still fully fund it, but that means we're taking it out of the LISRA. When we look at the goldenrod, we're already taking about $100 million out of the LISRA based on the current budget projections, based on good times as we have right now. You've got $100 million coming out of the LISRA going over to the school foundation program. When we make this cut, this 50% cut, that number is going to go up substantially. So that decreases the number of years where the LISRA can sustain our current level of funding. The alternative, of course, Mr. President, is just cut education. I mean, that's very doable. We can walk down that path. But, Mr. President, I can assure you that my community, that my constituents don't want to see education funding cut. They also don't want to see the Sheriff's Department cut. They don't want to see their fire services cut. They appreciate public health. They appreciate our roads, our sewers. They appreciate all of the facilities and services that we have, because my community wants to grow. It wants to diversify. And quality of life through those services are essential for that diversification. So when we vote for something as draconian as a 50% cut on residential property taxes, that's going to make a significant difference to the future of my community. It cannot achieve its goals. There's no way we'll be able to recruit and bring in new businesses to develop. There's no way we'll be able to keep the best and brightest of our students, our kids, our graduates from the university, to keep them in our communities, because they know that they need services, they need the support to build. And so they'll look to other communities, they'll look to other places. 0.6%. That's what our property tax is currently at, among the very lowest in the country. That rate, that's the essential tax that the typical taxpayer is paying to the state. We don't have an income tax. So sales and use, which is relatively low, but depending on where we're at, and one of the lowest property tax rates in the state. And Mr. President, you know as well as I do, that can only be sustained because we have significant taxes, some of the higher taxes, on the oil and gas community and the rest of the mineral sector. They're always pulling the weight for the rest of us. Seems like it's a bit of an insult, honestly, to those industries that have sustained us for so long, that we look at our tax structure and we say, wow, we're still making just enough off of them that we can all cut our own taxes just a little bit further. They've sustained us for so long, Mr. President, and we're willing to cut our own taxes in appreciation, perhaps, for that hard work that they've put in to maintain the state. But we know that it's not always going to be good times. Many of my colleagues in here had a very difficult time a few years ago cutting hundreds of millions of dollars from our budget because we weren't in the rich times. We were in the lean times. And that was brutal. We all felt that. We all experienced that. So for us to dramatically cut our revenue that affects our communities and our schools during the good times, knowing that they won't last forever, is short-sighted. And again, it's a disservice to the folks that come after us that are going to have to dig the state out of the problems that we create, because we all know that it's an awful lot harder to pass a new tax than anything we're talking about today, and this is already hard. Mr. President, on and against this bill, this is irresponsible policy, even if it's desirable policy. And we do all hear that everybody wants lower taxes,
Senator,
but when
your
we take
time
the
is up.
conversation a little bit further, we know that services are important as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. All right, Senators, let's go to Senator Nethercutt first.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, it's clear that the senator from the Ivory Tower is from a much different county than the rest of ours. And they value things very differently. But I know my county has actually been hurt by increasing property taxes. I know I walk out of one of the entities, businesses that I frequent regularly, and I hear from an individual who recently retired, whose wife would like to retire, recently diagnosed with cancer. And he approaches me every time he sees me and says, we have to do something about property taxes. Why is that? And the reason is because he's worried about his wife's ability to remain in their home, their family home, on her income once he may be gone. Dwells on him every day. And it is a thankful reminder to me, whom all of my constituents are in Laramie County. Not just the ones maybe in north central Laramie County that live in more affluent homes, but certainly are experiencing increased taxes that are altering their lives, that they are having to readjust their days from. This is not the end. I appreciate the dire concern, the sky is falling, but it's not. This is the request brought forth by the people. This is the solution brought forward to the Senate. This is not a new one. We've passed it out before. And what we do know as senators and as legislators is that we will continue to work on this. This is not a solution in a vacuum. We will continue to work with cities, towns, and counties, local governments, and special districts to reevaluate our tax policy, to find solutions, to make sure that we continue to prioritize education and those services. We are not leaving everyone out to dry, but we are providing relief to the people of Wyoming who genuinely need this relief. I urge your aye vote, and recognizing this is not the end, our work will continue.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Scott, over to you for your second time, sir.
Mr. President, I've been here in the Senate longer than anybody else here. I've been here when we had a genuine crisis, and to fund basic services, we had to add an extra cent to the sales tax in the 90s. It went through without opposition because it was pretty clear. Mr. President, this is a more evenly balanced situation. And you know, every government in the world has the job, and has had since the beginning of time, the job of balancing taxes that are imposed on people with the services they're going to get, Mr. President. The genius of the American system of government is the people get to retain control of that taxing and spending by delegating it to legislators who are subject to to frequent elections if we get it wrong. And Mr. President, I would like to compliment all the other members of this Senate, because I think this debate shows that everyone here is doing their level best to strike the proper balance for their constituents between the government services and the taxation. So, Mr. President, I'm sure everybody here is going to vote sincerely on what they think is best for their constituents. And I would like to compliment the rest of the members and say I'm proud to be one of you, because I think everybody is doing their sincere best, and this debate has shown, to try to balance properly the services versus the tax revenues that are required. So, Mr. President, I think you can all go home, we can all go home and say to our constituents, you may agree or disagree with what we did, but we did our best to try to strike the proper balance for all of you.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I mean, we keep talking about horses. I think we about beat this horse to death, but I'm going to use the horse analogy again. I'll just tell you right up front, I've been one of those folks that from the very beginning, I was okay with tax relief. I think we need to do it, but I've really struggled with no backfill to our cities, counties, towns, special districts. That's a struggle that I really have, and I kept sitting here thinking, you know, well, do I want to ride a thoroughbred, or do I want to ride a quarter horse, or I'm going to get bucked off of either horse, no matter which way I go. The question is, do I have to ride the horse out of town and up to the UNS, no matter which way I vote? That's going to be the tough one. I appreciate the debate, just like everyone else has. I think we've all been very thoughtful about our folks back home, and they're all our constituents, whether they work for a city, a county, a school district, a special district, or whether they're the lady down the street from me who is having a tough time paying her property tax. So I appreciate the debate, and I might just do a rock, paper, scissors and decide, you know, when the boat gets to me, which horse I'm going to ride. Thank you.
Senator Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I have to agree with some of my colleagues that this is one of those votes that's not an easy vote, and it's not a simple vote. But, Mr. Vice President, for me, with a 50% tax cut, I can't. Across this state, there's children that are clueless that we're in here meeting today, but they're sitting in classrooms and they're learning. And they're learning, and they're gonna take over tomorrow because they are actually the generation of today. And Mr. Vice President, I just can't put the schools that our kids are learning in possible harm's way. And because of that, I'm gonna be a no vote.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Salazar for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you know, I have repeatedly over the years had town hall meetings, and as we're debating this issue, you know what I'm thinking of right now? I'm thinking of all those folks who came to my town hall meetings in Fremont County, the seniors on fixed incomes, the husbands and wives working 2 jobs to put food on the table, the single moms with children. And I think of the issues of the food prices going up. I think of the issues of gas prices, prescription drugs, inflation. Here is an opportunity for my constituents to finally receive what they've been asking for years. And I don't see any other alternative for my constituents coming out of this chamber than this bill. This is it for my constituents. There's no other mechanism that I see coming out of this chamber other than this bill for my constituents. There is a human face. This property tax relief for my constituents is absolutely needed. And I ask all of you to think closely. This is the mechanism for most of us to give the people who sent me here last year. This is the mechanism. I ask that you vote yes. Thank you.
Senator Hicks, for your second time.
President, for my second time, and I empathize with all these discussions we've had. I would agree with everything from my colleague from Fremont County. I heard the same thing. But we are literally taking somebody else's money and saying, this is local government's money. They have the ability to control that. I don't know why we haven't spent more time educating county commissioners every year. May levy up to 12 mills, may. And the example we have is probably the shining example. My colleague from Teton County said his people demanded property tax relief. So what did they do? Those commissioners immediately reduced those mill levies because that was their money. It was their constituents. They were elected by them. We're not doing that, Mr. Chairman. And to my colleague from Albany County, my community values education. I represent a lot of really, really small communities. Do you think those people don't want their children educated? They do, and they want a quality education system. And if we wanted to do property tax relief, that is a fundamental responsibility under our Constitution to provide that. And we should do that. But we've created a one-size situation. I understand my colleague from Fremont County and those people on fixed income. We could have addressed that, but we were given a horse and said, this is the horse you're gonna ride, and it's a one-size-fits-all solution. Mr. Chairman, for us that represent those little communities and those rural counties, I look at my colleague that represents Bighorn and Washakie and Niobrara and Western and Carbon and Sweetwater. So let me tell you about that horse from those counties. That got stolen and it got rode into the ground and killed. And that's the effect of what this does. And for us rural counties, you know, you guys can spur and whip and this speaks to a larger issue. One thing I've always been proud about in the Wyoming legislature is we tried to take care of everybody, even those hardship counties and those little towns. We've always gone on our way to try to have parity, to understand our neighbors. It's a value in Wyoming that we've embraced and says we're a state. We're all in this together. But unfortunately, the horse we've been given to ride creates winners and losers, Mr. President. And it's before us, we're gonna vote on it. I have no doubt because the votes are from those large populated areas that have experienced those double-digit property tax inflation. And I empathize with everything that your constituents are telling you. But we've got a one-size-fits-all solution. Now, I just go back to the Code of the West, Mr. President. This really comport with what the Code of the West is. On and against this bill.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody else? Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. President. Education still has to be funded. By voting for this bill, you're not cutting education funding. Fact. I appreciate the red herring that presented and the concern about the quality of education to our children in those schools, but that was an intentional bomb thrown of misinformation. Hoping the person who expressed those concerns are hearing the correct information, that voting for this bill does not affect education funding. Also recognizing that the most populated counties in our state were certainly impacted by property tax increases, but ironically not the most. And those counties generally aren't as affected by the property tax increases as some of the more mid-sized counties across our state. I don't know if you're aware, but when we pass state laws, as we do a dozen times a day, it's a statewide solution. All of the laws that we pass are a statewide solution, and most of those issues don't affect all of our constituents the same. And so a one-size-fits-all, yeah, that's what we do here. It's called state lawmaking. That is in fact what we do, and we're required to do that under a property tax system because of the Constitution that requires equal application of those laws. So again, if you're clinging to the one-size-fits-all scenario, well, that's a constitutional requirement if you object to that. And if you are trying to avail yourself of concern for education, that is misplaced. I urge your aye vote to respond to the need of the people of Wyoming, need for property tax relief. We will continue to work with local governments to provide solutions to understand the reduction in revenues. We are committed to doing that. We will not fail our local governments. We will continue to provide those solutions. It's going to be all right. We can vote aye. This is the path forward for the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rothfuss, for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. President, for my second time. I wasn't going to stand up, but on the education topic, I wanted to address that. The idea that this doesn't cut funding for education is short-sighted. It does in the long run. We know that our school foundation program is based on a funding model, and we know that that funding model will be paid. That's required. So yes, in the near term, voting aye on this does not cut the funding for education. Instead, it shifts the source of the revenue to fund education from the property taxes that we get in an ongoing basis, where we right now, Mr. President, have roughly the same amount of revenue as we do expenditure. That's a good situation to be in, when your revenue and your expenses are about the same. If we pass this legislation, then we're no longer receiving enough revenue to pay the full cost of the school foundation program, and we take the money out of the legislative stabilization reserve account. So we use the savings instead of the existing revenue. That's unsustainable. Again, this is a good time, this is a good year, and so even under the best of circumstances, we will be burning through the LISRA quickly, paying the costs of education. And yes, even a couple years from now, if we continued that, we might not be done with the LISRA yet. But when the LISRA falls below a balance of 500 million, then things change. Then we don't fully fund education. Then we have a prorated cut of education based on the current statute. So, Mr. President, the idea that an aye vote on this is just fine for education is true if you can only see 2 years into the future. Then it's accurate. If we only care about what happens in the next 2 years until our next election, then it is accurate to say an aye vote on this doesn't affect the educational budget. But if we are collectively being thoughtful and recognizing the implications of our actions today affect future legislatures and future education and future expenditures in the state of Wyoming, then an aye vote on this absolutely does affect funding for education in the state of Wyoming adversely. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. Anybody else? Mr. Vice President, will you take the chair, please?
President Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. On and for the bill. Ladies and gentlemen, we've debated this a long time, and it's been a great debate. We've been debating this for years. I've said repeatedly in this body, The most difficult thing to do in the Wyoming legislature is to cut taxes. Plain and simple. This debate shows it, sir. Millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars flies out of here every time we do the budget. We don't even bat an eye. We'll spend it, and we'll spend it, and we'll spend it. But when the time comes, when the people of Wyoming have said, enough, we are taxed too much, give us some help, we spend an hour debating and looking for any excuse to vote no. Any excuse. The people of Wyoming are tired of excuses. They want action, and they want us to deliver for them, finally. They want to be heard. It takes bravery to make a vote like this. The easy way out is to vote no and say, oh, it wasn't the perfect bill. Well, let's not make perfect the enemy of the good. This is what the people wanted us to do. Let's deliver. On and for the bill. Chief Clerk would call the roll.
Third reading roll call, Senate File 69. Anderson? Aye. Barlow? Aye. Boner? Aye. Brennan? No. Case? No. Cooper? Aye. Crago? Aye. Crum? Aye. Dockstader? Aye. Driscoll? Aye. French? Aye. Guru? Aye. Hicks? No. Hutchings? Aye. Ide? Aye. Jones? No. Cole? No. Landon? Aye. Larson? Aye. McEwen? Aye. Nethercott? Aye. Olson? Aye. Pappas? Aye. Pearson? Aye. Rothfuss? No. Salazar? Aye. Schuler? Schuler? Aye. No. Scott? Aye. Smith? Aye. Steinmetz? Aye. President Beitman?
Aye.
Aye. Closing vote. Pappas, aye to no. Closing. Vote closed. Senate File 69, 23 aye, 8 no.
Senate File 69, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the Senate, Senate File 69 has passed the Senate. Madam Majority Floor Leader. Oh,
We have the whole, beg leave to rise and sit again. I'm sorry, we're not. We have the whole, we're on third reading.
just a second, Madam Floor Leader, let's go to Senator Rothfuss. He might have a privilege of the floor, perhaps?
That's correct, Mr. President. May I have privilege of the floor?
You bet.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to welcome our good friend, Senator Anthony Bouchard, who got to enjoy that entire debate. I'm sure it was a pleasure, but welcome back to the chamber, Senator.
All right. Welcome back to the chamber, Senator. I bet that was tough for you not to get up and want to say something, but appreciate you holding your tongue over there. All right, anybody, any other privileges of the floor before the floor leader puts us to work or sends us to lunch? We'll see what she wants to do. Madam Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we stand recessed until 1:45 PM, 1:45 PM.
Stand at recess till 1:45 PM. Any announcements? Committee announcements. Committees aren't meeting today? All right. Oh, I thought you did, Senator Case.
I think I'm the only one still working, Mr. Chairman, along with the greatest committee in the legislature, which is your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions. Tomorrow's going to be a big lift for us. We're going to clear out all the bills that we have left. We actually only have 4. We're going to start at 7:30 in the morning in W4. We'll take up Senate File 174, Constitutional Apportionment 2, Senate File 184, Prohibition on Electronic Voting Equipment 2, Senate File 190, Election Transparency. I think that's got a really good sponsor on it, in fact, Mr. President. And then Senate File 193, Electricity Utility Service Agreements, Large Loads. The plan is that we're going to work until we come in the morning, and then upon final adjournment of the day, we're going to go back to work and finish up all the bills, so all the bills will come, be disposed of or come out of corporations tomorrow. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to that committee and all the committees. You guys are doing an enormous amount of work, but you're doing good work, and we're all pulling our weight around here, so thank you for that. Senator Olson.
Yes, Committee Number 1, Judiciary, will meet in W2 at 12 o'clock to consider Senate File 157, Department of Family Services Confidentiality Amendments 2, Senate File 160, Treatment Courts Amendment 2, Senate File 124, Illegal Immigration, Identify, Report, Detain, and Deport, and Senate File 180, Supplemental Budget Limitations.
Thank you, sir. Any other announcements? Any other announcements? Okay, you heard the majority floor leader's motion. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Senate will stand at recess till 1:45 p.m.